Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In. I'm on today with two Midwestern broads. So, Sophie, of course, is in Wisconsin. Hi, Sophie.
Hey, Kelly.
And we were just talking about how excited we are to have vaccinated our children.
It's so exciting.
And of course, also joining us is longtime Vote Her In collaborator Rebecca Sive, who is the author of Every Day is Election Day, Vote Her In, and an upcoming book that we'll talk about, Make Her Story Your Story. So, hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly, and hi, Sophie. I'm glad you could join us. So, what we're going to do tonight is talk a little bit about our lessons learned from the Voter In series and what we're looking forward to doing in this domain, perhaps in others too. And I want to start by saying that that Two Broads is going to be going on hiatus, and so Vote Her In will too. And so the good news here is that what we always want to do, I think any one of us women who are out, and men too, who are out here trying to make the world better, is to figure out ways to be constructive, to be helpful, to educate, to mobilize. So, speaking for myself on the Voter In front, I wanted to share with people a couple of thoughts about that and what I take away and what I hope to share more of in my new context. So I'll take a moment to do that and then ask Sophie and Kelly to share their views about, I guess, their takeaways from Vote Her In and Two Broads generally. Um, so I guess the thing here is for me that I, I've been an organizer and a professor. I've had writer, various jobs in my life, but my commitment has always been to figuring out a way to mobilize women and energize them. And and then you work on a particular campaign or project, as it's been in my case, and then you think about, well, can I move on to the next phase? And the goal with Voter In, as you all may recall, and remains with us, albeit in different ways of organizing, was to complement the book, which basically laid out the strategy for how we can elect a woman president. We did get further than we had ever gotten, obviously, by electing a woman vice president and having several other women run really terrific and strong campaigns. Um, but the idea with the show, when I first talked to Kelly about it, was, well, let's continue this conversation that the book has stimulated. And in particular, let's talk with women who are leaders in the public sphere already, whether they're running for office or holding organizational roles or they're writers or whatever, and kind of get from them what their thoughts are on the concept of Voter In. And so for the first, I don't know, maybe 30, 35 episodes, something like that, we were meeting and talking during the period in the run up to last year's presidential, so just about a year ago. And of course, until August of that year, of 2020, perhaps there was a chance that a woman would be nominated. But in any event, we were fairly certain, and of course, we all were right, that a woman would be on the ticket. She needed to be and had to be, and the work of millions of women had led to that. And we had then spent the subsequent period, which now is just about a year, exploring again and continuously this notion of women holding executive office. And I think that, as we mentioned, over the course of time, the presidency obviously is the highest of those, but there are governors, there are mayors, there are heads of county boards, as for instance we have in Cook County in Illinois. There are lots of ways for women to hold executive positions, but too few of them have actually come to pass. So in this second part of the series, we talked a lot with people about this issue of executive leadership. In some cases, it was candidates, and then others as well. And so I feel like I kind of was reflecting earlier today. I feel like a sense of, it's kind of like when you finish writing a book, right? That, 75, no, I guess maybe 77 chapters here. That's kind of a lot of chapters, a lot to think about. And thank you to Kelly. She has the episodes are both on the Two Broads website and on a separate YouTube channel, which you all can find and will be on my website very shortly. So I hope that those of you who are listening or may watch this later will take the time to read those chapters, so to speak, reflect on uh, those lessons and those comments by these women. And I guess what I would just say to segue to this next phase is, you know, we all have now lived through this pandemic, right? For I don't even know how many months. Kelly and Sophie and I were talking earlier about some of what it's been like, particularly for the kids. But for me, as I think it was important for many, it was really important to find a way to be positive, you know, in addition to family life and making sure my family stayed healthy and all of that, but a way to be positive in my work. And so for me, as a writer and as an organizer, as a bit of a rabble rouser, you know, I thought, well, I can write something else, because what's going to happen here once we get out of this pandemic? Once, you know, Kamala Harris has been in office for a while and these other marvelous women get elected, as they did, you know, a couple of weeks ago this month, there's still going to be an incredible need for women to be engaged. And we really, to be a little bit on the downside for a minute, we're really in a place we've never been for almost a half a century. And that is with the specter of millions of women having had to leave the workforce, not being able to go back to the workforce, of course, living still with unequal pay, with some other aspects of policy that, however much Joe Biden may and Kamala Harris may have wanted them to be passed, are probably not going to be. For instance, paid family leave, and of course, the specter of the U.S. Supreme Court in decisions on a Mississippi case and the Texas case, effectively mooting Roe and rendering abortion illegal as a federal matter. So we're really in a somewhat dark place, but the good news there is figuring out what we can do. So my book, my pandemic project, is a journal workbook for women who want to be activists, who already are activists. My feeling was you can journal about your personal life. Many of us do, but we can also journal about our external life, what we want to do with our girlfriends, what we want to do with our coworkers. So it's a sort of guided journal, I think is the professional term, for women who want to be activists, helping them create plans. So I'm glad to say it's on pre-sale now. It'll be published January 2nd. And my sort of current tagline when I'm talking to people about it is, you know, people make all these New Year's resolutions, right? I know I do, and I always make the same ones and I always fail, but you know, my heart's in the right place. So my thought about this is new year, new you, in the sense that we do need each of us in our own way to find a way to make a contribution. So that's kind of what I will focus on. And I'm always delighted to hear from anyone who wants to talk about these matters, read a book, discuss a book. You'll probably see me on some channel somewhere. I need to figure that out, but I think it might be a good thing to do once I have a somewhat better understanding, I think, of how this journal works and how it can be helpful. So with that, I'll stop talking. And I think what we'll do for, you know, is just really ask Kelly and Sophie to reflect on their own thoughts here, and then a hearty thank you and best for Thanksgiving from all of us to all of you. So Kelly, take it away.
Yeah. So, you know, as I was reflecting on thinking about a lot about executive leadership, which you and I have talked to lots of women about now. And of course, in this time that we've been doing this I became an executive leader myself. So I don't talk a lot about my day job on the podcast, but I'm a dean of students. And so I lead a team, a fairly large team when you count the people who report to me and then the sort of dotted line people. And I went through executive leadership training that the university sent me to. And so I've thought a lot about, what does it mean to be a leader? What does it look like to be a leader? Different kinds of leadership, how you interact with your team members, and what it means to do that as a woman. And, how I do that might be different than another woman might choose to, but also could be very different than how a man might lead an office, and how I relate to the people who are on my team and I'm working with. I have the great fortune of having a boss who is a woman, and her boss is a woman. Unfortunately, once you get one more level up, it's a man. But still, it's pretty exciting to have that. I have a lot of other deans of students at the university who are women, and so it's been really great to sort of see not just how do women lead and how can we think about that, but also how do women leaders support each other. So it's been a rather difficult past week in my job, and I found myself a lot turning to the other women to say, how should we approach this? What are you doing? How can we think together collaboratively about how to approach these issues? And turning to each other, frankly, just when we kind of needed a little bit of support, emotional support. And so I think to me, that's been something that I've had that experience, to be able to talk about with women, with you, Rebecca, but then also to live and to sort of get that experience. So that I think to me has been one of the really big takeaways is just what does leadership look like and what can it look like? I think the other sort of really big takeaway for me has been, and this isn't revelatory, but that every issue is a woman's issue. Like we've talked, of course, to lots of women who work on things like reproductive justice or, but there is no issue out there that women aren't thinking very deeply about, and that doesn't, of course, affect women. And to really think about all issues as women's issues, and the things that, as we've talked to women, the things that drive them to run for office are, the things that drive everybody. Things like healthcare, things like caring for their parents and their kids, and all of this stuff sort of goes together. And so to me, I think those are sort of the two things I've thought a lot about in this journey as we've talked to lots and lots and lots of women. I can return in a bit to what I'm doing with the next chapter, but Sophie, do you want to reflect too on your sort of takeaways?
Sure. I would say one of my takeaways is that we have built the bench. I know in 2016 there was a lot of talk about needing to build a bench, a backbench of women in positions of power, but not quite up to executive power yet, so that then we could move forward with putting women into positions of executive power. And I think one of the things I've learned from all of Two Broads, but also specifically from Voter In, is that we have the bench of women leaders. They're ready to lead, and they have experience and they have wisdom and they're ready. And now all we got to do is win, as the kids say. That bench is built. I think I've noticed a change in the feel of the political situation since 2020. Kelly and I have talked about this before, but I felt like in 2016 to 2020, we were sort of just in crisis mode and very much in the mode of trying to activate women voters. And I think a lot of women have been activated now. And I think a lot of women, particularly women, I would say over 25, women in my age group, so 25 to 45, have been permanently activated. Looking at the results from the recent election in 2021, Democratic turnout wasn't down. It was just turnout was high on both sides. And turnout has been very high for women regardless since 2016. So I think we've done the work to activate women voters. Now I think we're in a new phase of political activism and political work where we're going to have to, it's not going to be as easy, right? It's easier to activate the people who already agree with you, who just don't think that it's important to vote. It's easier to convince them than to work against forces that are maybe a little more nefarious. So we're ready. We have a bench, it's built, and I'm really excited to see what the next 5 years bring.
One of the big changes in the last decade is the diversity of women, right? And I think that really deserves a mention here. And I think also the diversity of women in particularly as mayors in terms of this matter of executive leadership. And I was reflecting a bit. Actually, I was jumping up and down in my office when Michelle Wu was elected. I mean, she was running against another woman who I didn't know quite as much about. But I thought, well, gee whiz, I mean, this isn't the first time a woman of her age and remarkable talent and intelligence has won, but it really is quite special given the history of Boston, right? And so I think the other thing to take note of here is not only is there a bench, but there's not big enough in my view, but there is a bench of women in places where the level of perseverance, persistence that's required is remarkable and to be so admired. And I, of course, admire the women of my generation and earlier generations. I mean, we face a lot as well, but I think if we're looking at today, we can take heart from the fact that, once we get to a certain critical mass, maybe almost there, Sophie, then we can see some remarkable occurrences. So, Kelly, a word on your future plans? I think I have.
Yeah, so perhaps people know, perhaps they don't. I started back in June another podcast that's called Unsung History. And this has let me be a little more creative, I think. I think one thing Sophie and I both found is, you have enough conversations with someone running for Congress and like they get a little bit rote after a while. Like you're like, oh, I'm asking the same questions over and over again. And they're different answers and they're interesting answers. But the neat thing about this project for me has been I've been able to dig into stories in American history that just don't get told as much. Sometimes they're things that have been actively suppressed. Sometimes they're things that just sort of got buried a little bit. And of course, I am not a historian. I am not an expert in history. What I do is ask questions. So on this podcast, I'll do a little like intro narrative, but then I'll bring an expert on. I love talking to history professors. I think they're just fantastic people. And can really ask some really interesting questions. It's thematically really not that different than what we've done for the past 4 years on Two Broads. A lot of it is thinking about the role of women and immigrants and people of color. And, I think there's a lot that I can do there that's very, very similar work, can just sort of get at it in a different way. And so I have been doing that, and I have episodes planned out through at least May. So that will continue to be weekly.
So I will say, as a history professor myself in past life, when I first started teaching, I was teaching Chicago history, and I think that was in the mid-'70s when I was in grad school. And I was, of course, always focused on the women, right? So talk about repeating yourself. I started talking about Jane Addams and Ida B. Wells and all these fantastic women, a couple of whom you've talked about on Unsung History at U of C, back then. And I thought, well, gee whiz, somebody has to talk about these women. Of course, I wasn't the only one, but of course we were talking about it as history, right? And there is a lot of important history, and now a lot of important her stories. So I'm hoping that as we work together in that way of, telling stories about women and sharing how women can make their own stories that will really change what people know about what women can do and can be and ought to be credited for doing. So just a couple more words and then thank you. I think I want to make sure that people understand, and Kelly and Sophie and I have talked about this, that sometimes this work is really hard. And I know everybody knows that, but 500 episodes is a lot of episodes, 75 episodes is a lot of episodes, and no one's looking for a pat on the back. I think what I want to say about that is I hope that for those of you who are listening and also doing hard work, that you continue it in every way that you can. And as we've just discussed here, those ways may change a bit, but find a way when you get tired or when you feel you're burnt out or doing the same thing over and over again, find a way to do it differently. Because, as Kelly was mentioning also, every issue is a woman's issue. Every issue historically, when you talk about the neighborhood level, in many places has been led by women raising their voices and asking for change. And I think that's the kind of thing that we most want to take away, certainly from talking about vote her in as a concept specifically related to women running for office, but more generally as a notion of every woman should be voted in, right? Every woman should have the opportunity to express her point of view, say what she's concerned about, be a leader if she wishes to be an organizer and behind the scenes if that's her preference. So as we say goodnight and happy Thanksgiving, I hope you all will take to heart this notion that what we want and share with you is to vote every woman in. So thank you all. Keep in touch. I'm at rebecca@rebeccasive.com. As you all probably know, look for me in your various places that you may be looking in social media, maybe even in other media. It's hard to imagine other media, but these days. But thank you all. It's been a treat, and thank you to Kelly in particular for really being not only at the front of the scene but behind the scenes as well. So thank you both, and thank you to the audience here, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Rebecca. I think when we went to Medici, all those many, many, many months ago at this point, and talked about this, we couldn't have imagined how big it would get and how, we were able to interview US senators, and, it was a really amazing experience. I think, yeah, absolutely. This is the moment, I think, that everyone needs to sort of figure out how to recharge, not just in politics, but in everything. I'm seeing this in higher education, certainly, that everyone just seems so burnt out, and we need to be there. We need to be able to get in the fight. And so whatever it takes for everybody to sort of find that thing that recharges and energizes you before 2022 starts, because that's going to be a tough fight, and the tough fights aren't going to stop. So I hope that everyone's able to sort of find that for themselves, and we'll still be on social media and all those places. So yes, we want to continue the conversation just in a different form. Sophie, any parting thoughts?
No, I think you covered it. Thanks for letting me come along for the ride.
Yeah. So for everybody out there, we will have one final Two Broads Talking Politics audio recording episode at some point. We'll let you know when. I asked my kids what we should do, and they said, you should do a clip show. And I said, okay, well, I'm not listening to 537 episodes to figure out the right clips to play. So we'll see what that looks like. So at some point, there'll be an episode. But then we're going to go on a little break from this format, and I hope everyone gets a chance to have a lovely Thanksgiving and lovely holidays.
Thanks everybody, and take good care. We'll be in touch.
Yes, thank you all.